Kaiser Research online. I've just done a tracker for Wolfden Resources Corp, which I've upgraded to a good spec value favorite. The stock's around 18 cents right now. I've done some outcome visualizations for both a 1,000 ton per day scenario that the company with the resource that it already has, the 4 million or so tons of high-grade massive sulfide mineralization. But I've also done a what if the company's exploration program could boost the resource to 10 million tons at the same grade. And it's a world of difference. The first valuation is $135 million US, which translates into a stock target of about $1.24 Canadian if there is no further dilution. And that's not super exciting. It means the stock could maybe double or triple from current levels. But when you look at just expanding it from 4 million tons to 10 million tons, you come up with a substantially bigger number, 464 million using the model. And this is at 2,000 tons per day. That translates into a stock target of $4.25 before any additional dilution. That is substantial upside. So the CEO of Wolfden, Ron Little, and the VP Exploration, Don Dudek, have joined me today to give a shortened version of the normal presentation they do to help us understand where does this upside that could really make a big difference for Wolfden reside at the Pickett Mountain project. Ron, take it from here.
Great, thanks very much, John, and thanks for pulling us in. I'd qualified two things. This slide is what the zone looks like, so it's unlike gold deposits. We get a very good visual when we hit this massive sulfide ore body. We can see it, and we're just starting to drill it as of last week. And second, your numbers are, I believe, all quoted on sort of spot prices, which are lower than what the analysts are predicting, especially for lead and zinc on a long-term basis. So I think that helps us on having further upside as well. So we're all going to be, speaking into the future here. So there's a forward-looking statement that everybody should review. So on to Maine, we're really the first movers in Maine in over 20 years. Maine has an extension of the world famous Brunswick camp, and the rock units carry on all the way through Maine down into New Hampshire. Maine, I would say, went green earlier. They were one of the first to institute exploration permits. So you needed a separate permit for drilling and line cutting and geophysics. So everybody went back to New Brunswick and Manitoba for these kinds of deposits. Ironically, Maine just changed its mining code in 2017. And there was certainly, what some would say some positives and negatives, but the huge positive is they've now got a very definitive timeline process to get to a mining permit, which was the big doubt 30 years ago. Was nothing was very defined, and Maine was going green and liberal. So that made the miners nervous. Second, they now have abolished all the exploration permits. We only need to file an annual work report, which we've done the last 2 years, and it's only a few weeks for them to review and approve the report, and it's really a continuation from the year before. And in addition, Maine has no indigenous issues like we do in Canada. So we recognize they're there. We include them in our rezoning and our permitting, but they don't have the overriding power of authority over whether we get a permit or not. And lastly, we own all the land, and our neighbors own their land and their mineral rights. So we're really building a mine on our own property effectively, which really changes I'd say the body language around the table when you're building something outright on your property. So the negatives were no open pit mining, which does not affect us at all because this is a high grade underground mining. They also instituted dry stack tailings, which is not a huge issue because we would be trying to retain the maximum amount of water here anyway, because our PEA is showing we already need more water than less. And so we would be imposing our own dry stack tailings. And then they impose a 100-year bond, which is similar to BC, Newfoundland, where you have to make sure you've got enough money up front to monitor post-closure. And we see here building a zero discharge with dry stack tailings I think within 3 years, we're down to probably 1 water sample per year just to make sure that everything is still neutral. So that to us won't represent much of a bond once we can demonstrate the tailings are working.
Now, COVID-19 is a big problem again here in the United States. Here in California, they are now reversing the reopening that they had started. What's the situation like in Maine? You've got your program started. What is the danger that they will shut you down midstream before you get your full 5,000 meters done?
Excellent question. Well, first off, you know, there's only about 1 million people in Maine, and they're all basically down here. Once you get north of Bangor, it's moose and trees, and there's been very little COVID up here. When it showed up, it was from people visiting. So we're, you know, at very low levels. In addition, because we own the property and we're harvesting timber, Wolfden's in the timber business, which is essential in Quebec, in New Brunswick. So we can cross the border to monitor what we're doing on the property and effectively not be forced into quarantine on either side. So the property we purchased, including the timber, is about 7,000 acres. We've got very large timber families and companies around us that own the land and own the mineral rights as well. So there's no claim staking in here. We're only 3 miles from this Highway 11, which it used to be the main highway in the state before I-95 was built. And the dotted line is about 3 miles of really good logging road that takes us right to the deposit. Well, essentially, I mean, this is really showing the metal value. So at prices, let's say this is a price deck that was in favor last summer, and you can see gold is even higher, silver's higher, copper's back to 3, but lead and zinc are a little lower. But, you know, we're looking at about $500 rock. And simply put, you know, we think we can do all the mining and processing and our G&A for under $200 a ton. So with an in situ value of more than double what we have, you know, that leaves room for now reduced value for for smelting and metal recovery, etc. So, you know, we're starting small. 1,000 tons a day relates to this slide, which is the official resource that we filed last year. We used a 9% cutoff grade, which, you know, 9% is the average grade worldwide. So we're using a high cutoff, which we will reduce in the PEA. So instead of 20% zinc equivalent, what you see in the yellow, we'll be down around 18, and we'll have about 2.5 million tons of indicated and 2.5 million inferred. So about 5 million tons is what we'll use in the PEA. We'll crush that, we'll run it through a concentrator, and we're going to float off sequentially the copper, lead, and the zinc. And you get precious metals in all three, but you get half of the precious metals back in the lead and the copper, which you actually get value for. Anything that ends up in the zinc, the smelter gets the bonus on that one. So that's sort of the basis of the technology. And of course, we dump anything into the dry stack tails with reduced water. We then take any of the processed water, put it back in the plant, and any of the water that we pump out of underground is going to go through a filtration plant, a treatment plant, and it's going to get down to creek quality before it's discharged through basically a septic system. So it goes back through a rock filter into the ground at a neutral level. Yeah, I mean, to jump way ahead, we've only found, or Getty's only found 2 lenses. We think there could be room for 4 or 5 or 7, like Buchan's was in Newfoundland at similar grades. And then you would want to do some metallurgy on every lens. So there's no use of getting too far in the metallurgy until we've decided, you know, we've run out of room on adding some serious tonnage here. So let's jump into where we're going to drill. This is a plan.
So Ron,
yeah.
Go stay with the slide you're at.
Yep.
Suppose the exploration drilling beyond the existing lenses are a complete bust. Mother Nature doesn't like you. other things go wrong. But I see you have some holes in targeting the zone itself. What potential for expansion is left within the existing east-west lens that Getty found in the 80s?
Well, I've always said there's room for another 1,000,000 tons for sure around the ore body, especially at depth. When we started drilling this project, Getty had 3 million short tons. We only drilled deeper on one lens and we got added 1,000,000 metric tons at even better grade. And we've only drilled down to 800 meters and it's still open. So, you know, these deposits often go down, what, 1.5 to 2 kilometers, Don?
Yeah, the aspect ratios are sort of often 10 to 1. So let's say you have a kilometer of strike in total, it can go down a long ways.
Yeah. So, you know, we've got a lot of confidence in adding at depth, but one, it's expensive and our stock is cheap and we don't want to raise money here. B, you know, this still has that, you know, overhang that this is an old project and we're the new guys to go and add something to it. So adding a new lens would be much more powerful for moving our stock price than just adding more tons at depth. So we're kind of leaving those add tons at depth to the plan B and plan C. And you know, we'll show you in a coming slide. We flew through the whole belt here, which is 30 kilometers, and we have lookalike targets in that belt. So, you know, we've got other things to try here that go out 15 kilometers either side before we get too bogged down on going deep. Now, if we hit something in this pattern that Don's laid out that really rings the bell, well, there's no question we can keep chasing that and then bring in a second rig and go, you know, drill off the regional targets as well.
The west zone is the left-hand image, and on the right edge of the west zone, there's a parallel corridor. Right now, we're looking at a planar image, but that corridor is almost like an accordion coming out of the page, where the massive sulfides are repeated again and again across about, again, a 50 to 80 meter horizontal distance. And we expect that in that area that we'll, with those holes, proposed holes 5 and 4, we're looking at that accordion. We're trying to get more details on it so we can model it properly for a resource. It's too early to do it now with the current PEA. We need to drill these holes first. And then if we can demonstrate that consistently, we'll add tons. Now, if we go over to the right and the other pair of black dash lines, that's where there's something else going that's similar. We're seeing, again, 100 meters of massive sulfide in one of the holes with the repetition of the massive sulfides. A large part of that wasn't modeled because no one knew how to model it. But when we recognize that it's folding repetition, and there's geological reasons for it, and I won't get into the details, but the geology supports, let's say, stacking in a corner by deformation. So we'll chase those. These areas, the A, B, C, D, and the gravity anomaly in the lower left corner, all of these will be covered by new IP or induced polarization surveys. And really what we're looking for is two things. One is conductivity. If we have massive sulfide that's close to surface that we can pick up, the IP will pick it up. The other thing we're looking at is the alteration systems that are associated with the massive sulfides. So you can imagine these big pyritic, disseminated pyrite to stringer pyrite, mineralized or altered rocks, and we can pick this up with the IP. So our targeting of the drill holes is targeting known massive sulfide extensions, fold extensions, IP conductivity anomalies that represent alteration and mineralization, gravity anomalies, and conductive anomalies from previous surveys. So there's quite a collection of data that we're using, and we did get a bit more sophisticated with the data recently. We inverted all of the surface data into 3D and brought it down 300 to 400 meters to help us vertically, to help us with our targeting and understanding and picking individual targets.
So Don, your soil geochem really fades out in the area of targets C and D. Why are those targets?
Well, one, there's their conductive anomalies, and two, one of the reasons why the soils fade out is you start getting more glacial debris, and your connection to the bedrock sort of disappears. It's like throwing a mask or a blanket over top of it. And so even when you get those and you don't get a great soil response, if you get a decent anomaly, you still have to test it because you can't tell for sure that you're not missing something.
Well, wouldn't Getty have like blasted any conductors in the vicinity of the east and west lens back in the 80s?
Well, they chased along the A anomaly a fair amount. I think in the eastern part of A, they didn't quite hit the conductor. I think they missed it. They might have been fooled that the glacial direction is from sort of the northwest to the southeast. And so you can get a bit of dragging of your anomaly, and it's very important to understand the geology. As best I can tell, there's been very little mapping and very little, stratigraphic chasing of the target stratigraphy, and that's where we're a little bit further ahead.
Yeah, they flew a wider survey, obviously not VTEM, so they weren't looking as deep. And as Don said, they were hitting anything that looked like a conductor, and if they didn't hit it, they didn't waste much time. They went on to the next one. It was a total geochem discovery. Like the ore body is almost on the top of a knoll up here, and the glacial cover is really less than 2 meters. So it was ideal conditions for lead and zinc to accumulate right on top of the ore body.
Yeah, and
So
we can.
what you're saying is when Getty explored this, it had its big geophysical survey, but it also had a soil geochem survey, and it immediately went to this one that lit up here because of the whatever random circumstances of the local topography, and bang, they got it right away, and that's where they stayed.
Yeah, they basically went by the geological map first. Like, we'll show you the map. We're using the same 1950 special. They did 1 mile centers on soil geochemistry. So they just happened to be in this, within this area with one sample, and it got a really high kicker. So they came back in, took a few more, and then they basically did a grid in here and drilled right into it once they got the center of their anomaly. Now they flew it as well, and it's not a blistering conductor. The zinc's not always the best for giving you a high conductor. It's a moderate conductor, but it was coincident with the hot geochemistry too.
So given that the soil geochem is not useful in the area of B and C, and these are conductors that have never been drilled, hitting something over there that looks like the east and west lens would be a very big deal.
Absolutely. Well, and it doesn't stop there just because our current property stops there. So bring back that question when we show you the rest of the belt, as it were, in 1950, which again was probably mostly mapped by air photo. With some interpretation using the geophysics.
But with these sort of D, C, B, and A, each one of these could be a 2 million ton lens. So
yep.
You could get lucky on all 4 of them, and you have an 8 million ton footprint to stack on top of the 4 million, which you're going to grind up to 5 million, 6 million anyways with the local drilling. So just within this area, 10 million tons as a potential outcome is not unreasonable.
Yeah, I mean, there's a room for each one of those anomalies to have 4 or 5 million tons, not just 2, right? This is the 1 kilometer, 2 lenses here. You can see that's smaller than what D represents, right? Yeah.
In other words, it's if all of them are miraculously massive sulfides, you're talking about adding 8 to 16 million tons, which starts making it look like buckets.
Yeah, like where we are today. We flew it. The next year we sampled part of it as much as we could. Now we've got a few targets we really like, and we're already optioning ground around us so that those will be drilled eventually this year as well. We're we're well down the path. I'm quite confident we're going to be drilling targets, new targets on new ground around us.
So if I hear you correctly, you flew this large geophysical survey. You also sent your crew out there to collect samples in strategic locations, and you haven't been able to disclose any of this in public because you don't own this land. You mentioned that the ownership is splintered, but I'm under the impression that a few logging companies own almost everything in this area. Is it splintered, or are you dealing with just a handful of big giant logging companies?
Yeah, no, in this package of ground, there's some big family logging companies in here. And in fact, you know, we've sold a lot of our timber to our next door neighbor, and they own a lot of ground around us. And so that's who we've been dealing with first. And, you know, the splintered ownership is on that other block of ground further into Maine, where the mineral rights are held by different parties. And it's really just because it went back so far that individual family members passed away and gave their rights to somebody else in the family. So it's taken us a while to put all the pieces of the puzzle together, but we've got at least half the property signed up. We're just trying to get the other members to say, well, we accept the same terms. So it's kind of that easy, but it's time consuming. So
assuming that the general work, the regional work you did came back positive, if you can swing reasonable deals with these landowners, this could go into a much bigger district play than it's currently structured.
Yeah, no, I think if we have our way here, you know, much of what we flew, you know, we hope to control. And we're going to work our way around the various targets. And like Don explained to you, if you've got thick glacial cover, you're not going to have the benefit of a soil anomaly to give you more confidence. And there'll be some targets we're just going to want to drill anyway. But we're, you know, again, Wolfden's been a cheap stock. It's been tough to raise money for base metal exploration. We're going after what we would think is our low-hanging fruit first to get, call it a quick success, and then expand into the rest of the belt.
So you know, another big milestone later this year is a potential news release saying we have managed to secure additional ground within this 30-kilometer favorable belt.
Yep.
And all of it's pretty much unexplored since Getty took a look at it. And Getty's approach was limited by soil geochem, which doesn't work everywhere because of the glacial overburden obscures the bedrock in a lot of areas, and they never had the sort of geophysical coverage that you have today. So we're talking potentially an entirely new district.
Yeah, it's definitely a district, you know, separated from New Brunswick in the same package of rocks. So, you know, anybody looking to be in Maine or New Brunswick, you'd look for a belt like this, and hopefully you can gather most of it. And better yet, there'd be lots of outcrop. Like if we had more outcrop here, we would have quicker success, because like Don said, we're looking for unwrapping how this was laid down and specific alteration and specific rocks, but there's not a lot of outcrop in this area, unfortunately. So it's a real benefit that the soils work on higher ground. And but the trend is your friend here, right? Like you can see that northeast, southwest, you know, when you get onto a contact and you find the right horizon, you just got to keep following it. So, you know, it's taken us more than a couple of years to figure out the geology, and we're not all there yet, but with help of Don and the guys from Altius, Lawrence Winters has been a real strong technical player in all of this. He did his thesis on Buckens. So, you know, we've had the benefit of Don and Lawrence for a few days, you know, trying to put this whole model together. And once you figure the model out, we think we'll have greater success at finding more lenses.
And the Brunswick 12, and I guess this is a question for Don, if something like that existed within this land package within, you know, reasonable closeness to the surface, would Getty have found it using the geophysics they used 40 years ago?
I think there'd have been a reasonable chance for them to find it, but they might not have found a Buckens, right? And that's just a function of conductivity. The zinc-rich bodies just don't show up very well, and the more modern airborne surveys have better connectivity to the massive sulfide bodies, and we can see them easier, and we can also see them deeper. So the early surveys might have only seen down, I don't know, 100, 200 feet, and with some of the more modern surveys, we can see down hundreds of meters. So that's a big benefit as well. Because how lucky do you need to be for it to be on surface, you know, and not 100 meters down? So the easy stuff's been found, I think. Although I was on the ground a couple of weeks ago, and I'm seeing altered rocks that look right, very good surface geochemistry. They look like there should be something nearby. And all we need to do is a little bit more work to define a target. And as Ron said, we'll be there this year.
So how much untested exploration potential is there in the Buckens area relative to this Pickett Mountain area?
Well, I think quite a bit, because Buckens has been hit pretty hard, right? And this area really hasn't. So, you know, we've got similar grades, not quite as high. We're dealing with smaller deposits. So we should not dream about a Bathurst camp. We should dream about finding a Buckens scale district in this relatively underexplored area.
Yep, I'm agreed to go with it.
So Sadoc's not going to go to $50. It only go to maybe $10 if you're successful.
Yeah,
that's just me speaking. I can do it. I know you can't.
Yeah,
we can work with that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Okay, well, that's probably a good segue to wrap this up before somebody says we're too ridiculous. So, you know, the PEA, we're pushing that pretty hard. We'd said it's going to come out in Q3, but with any luck, that'll come out before September. We've got the IP crew there now. I don't know whether we get back to more gravity if we need it, but we're hoping the IP strengthens some of our targets. And we do hope to be drilling off of our property come September as well on some of these brand new targets. So we're fully funded to do all that. We've sold the bulk of our timber forward. So this whole program was funded without issuing a share. We raised 3 million Canadian just by selling our timber. And, you know, if we can hit on this, we'll obviously need to ramp up the drilling and do more definition drilling. So, but I think the segue of the PEA late in the summer and any new target gets us to a much stronger position than where we are now.
So suppose you hit something new and big in this Pickett Mountain area. Can you drill year round?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you asked that. Like you know, the ore body was literally 25 meters off of a great lumber road. So when Ewan and Don Hoy bought this property in 2017 and in November, you know, we were drilling in December because we set up right on the road and we drilled through the whole winter. Again, we're only 10 miles from town. So we've rented a couple houses. We live and eat in town and, you know, eat at the diner and buy our groceries at the grocery store. So everybody in town knows who we are. It's just an easy place to work.
All right. Well, Ron and Don, thank you for taking the time to present this to me and make it available for viewing by my subscribers and everybody else out there. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks, John.